is Robert Darling. I have been in theater since the late 50s. I'm a designer and I'm a director. The first time I met Henry was at Central City, and he had promoted a new opera called The Face on the Barroom Floor, based on the poem, based on the story, and it was an outline that he sent me for this grand three-act opera. It was my first season at Central City. It was the 100th anniversary of the Central City Opera House. And I'd known of Central City for ages and ages and had admired Donald Owenslager, who did the wonderful designer who did the Ballad of Baby Doe, and also Robert Edmund Jones, who really revolutionized the idea of theater and theater design in the 1920s. And Robert Edmund Jones was the first artistic director of Central City Opera. So when I became the artistic director of Central City Opera, it was like this grand mantle of this hero of mine had suddenly appeared. And it was my first season, and I wanted the board of directors to know that I was more interested in live composers than dead ones, and somehow we were going to do that. And the first season, I wanted very much to have a world premiere. So here comes Henry, and he has this outline for a grand three-act opera, and I said, Henry, you know, we can't afford it. We can't put this on the Opera House stage and afford it. The board won't pay for it. They already think I'm crazy. You know, what can we say? And so we thought, and I said, Henry, I want you to come with me. And we got out of the Opera House, and we walked down the street to the Face Bar. And I said, look, this is it. And he said, yeah, I know. And I said, why don't we just do it in here? And he just became crestfallen. And he said, oh my God, my grand opera in a bar. What do we do? I said, yeah, let's do it in the bar. Why not? And Henry went back and with John Beaumont, the librettist, and they wrestled with this darn thing. And they tried to figure out what in the world are we going to do. And they came up with the most perfect solution for this commission possible. And as you know, for, oh my goodness, 30, 40 years, Face on the Barroom Floor was the most popular American opera and most produced American opera going. And what Henry did, and John Beaumont did, was to figure out how the context of Central City, what it is, where it is, the fact that there are these sensational singers that come there of a summer, provide a framework in Face, and then there's this silly story of the bar. And one of my dear friends, and anyway, so we did it. We did it in the bar. We would do dress rehearsals in the bar, and we wouldn't sell any tickets. We would just, you know, the people would, whoever was in there swilling down a drink, and there was a little honky-tonk piano player in the corner, and Henry very beautifully scored it to start with another little honky-tonk-esque piano, which we had set up at the other end of the bar. So the honky-tonk piano player takes a break, the other piano player starts up a cello and a flute, and we're into it. And the folks sitting in the bar, you know, would sort of acknowledge the other piano player, but not really, as they were sitting there with their beer or whatever it was. You know, it was great. It was absolutely great. And then these singers entered from the street, talking very loudly. And there's a cue in there where John has the Violetta, the guy from New York who's come out to visit his friend in the Central City, says, oh, you're my Violetta, you're my star. And she breaks into that little quote from Sempre Liber at the beginning. And after that, we're all in it. And you can see these people who had never seen an opera, heard an opera, and they think, oh my God, what have we done? You know, he came in here for a lovely drink, and now what of it? What's going on? And then they would sit there and they would watch this thing, and they would hear this thing, and then they would be drawn into it, and you could just see the magic of the opera taking over them, you know, in their body language and everything else, as they would suddenly know that this was something else. And the story would go on, and it goes back in time, a little flashback, 100 years. We were all into the story. And the way I staged it in the bar, she gets up on the bar and she sings her little aria on the bar. And what Henry and John did was that they did all of the things you can do in opera. You know, little arias, little wonderful trios, two wonderful trios in that piece, and duets, and everything that you do in a long evening in the opera is done in that little miniature half-hour piece. Wonderful. And we did one dress rehearsal, and the first time the woman that gets killed, as you know, alas, and there was some woman from Iowa who was in there, and she had just got drawn into it. When the gun went off, she went like this, and all the drinks, everything else, all over the floor. It was just terrible. It was just terrible. But that's what opera should do. That's what opera wants to do. It wants to tell a story, so compelling a story, that you cannot remove your attention from it. And when you're in that small little place, the bar in Central City, or even the fabulous little opera house in Central City, you are in such proximity to the energy of the great singers that you are drawn in. The great power of music theater is irrevocable there. So that was my first meeting with Henry, was over Face, and convincing him that his 3-act opera on the Opera House stage would be infinitely better as a half-hour opera in the bar itself. And the whole time I was there, we did performances in the bar. I understand now they don't do that as much, which is whatever. With the great success of Face, and that first season I also had Kurt Herbert Adler, who was the wonderful director of the San Francisco Opera, and he said, you know, Bob, this Henry is talented, I think. What do you think? I said, yeah, sure, absolutely, you know, Adler, you should commission him. And Adler wanted something that he could do in the streets. And he had this idea that he called brown bag opera, and he thought, well, you know, here's my friend Bob Darling, and they do this thing in the bar. We just do a new opera for San Francisco, and he lit on the idea of Emperor Norton. And Emperor Norton was, of course, a street person in San Francisco, and a great legend of his own, and a wonderful guy. And Henry came up with this charming little opera on Emperor Norton that's been quite a success, and it's done quite regularly, especially in San Francisco. It's a genre that I would call occasional operas. Face is in some ways an occasional opera. Emperor Norton is also that kind of thing. And from Emperor Norton and his work with Henry, it became apparent to me that we had to get Henry to think in a slightly larger architecture or design for a piece of music theater. He had another 1-act opera that was called Lilith, and I had founded a small little company down in Carmel Valley, which is where I'm doing the Bohème next month, and they too were a little occasional space, and they too wanted, and I wanted them to work with composers so that we could get pieces that would be viable. So Henry came down there with Judy Fine, his librettist of the Lilith piece, and I said, Henry, why don't we reinvent this as a 3-act opera? The reverse of what we did on Face. And out of that came Hotel Eden. In the Lilith, there's this little chorus of the 3 angels that say, welcome to the Hotel Eden. And I thought, that's the perfect name for this piece.
Tell me about Hotel Eden.
Hotel Eden. So this notion of working closely with composers I was able to carry out in Central City. And in fact, there were several seasons where we did have more live composers than dead ones on the rep. And in the little company that I had created, founded with Randy Bear and Peter Meckel in Carmel Valley, we were able to shepherd into being several little operas. And the first one that I thought we really needed to try was to see how we could nurture Henry into writing a larger scale work. And out of that came Hotel Eden. And we did several workshops, wonderful workshops, in which we tested the 2nd act and we tested the 3rd act, and we unhappily ran out of money and couldn't do the premiere. So the premiere for Hotel Eden was done by San Jose Opera, and they did a quite good job. I am still chomping at the bit to do a production of Hotel Eden. But Hotel Eden is this wonderful little three-act piece which looks at couples and coupling. There's the middle-aged couple, there's the young couple, and then there's the elderly couple. And the young couple is Adam and Eve, and the other woman is Lilith. And the middle-aged couple is Admiral Noah and his wife, and he has just been released from Betty Ford's for his drinking problem. And they check into the hotel on New Year's Eve. And then the elderly couple, and the hotel and the music Henry has contrived for it is wonderful. It's like a Palm Beach hotel. And the elderly couple is Sarah and Abraham. And the other woman is Hagar. And we move through all of those seminal issues in that great story. And Henry has put into both of those acts wonderful ensembles. He's a brilliant writer of ensembles. In the story of Admiral Noah and Mrs. Noah, she has a great sort of Ethel Merman song about why do they always call me Mrs. Noah, you know, and she talks about being in Samoa and whatever. Wonderful, wonderful, giddy, silly song. It says, and still I'm Mrs. Noah, my real name. Oh, my real name. And she comes up and says, my real name. I've forgotten. Oh, dear. Abraham and Sarah's story begins with, you know, they're sitting sort of getting up in the morning in this Palm Beach hotel experience. And Hagar is urging them on to have some non-fat yogurt and whole wheat bread and whatever it is, you know. And Sarah has been ill. She doesn't know why she's been ill. And she suddenly realizes that she picks up the mirror and she sees how old she's become. And she tells us that, God had told Abraham that he was going to have all of these descendants, and so I fixed it up with Hagar. And I knew, what Henry has written for Sarah is an aria that is the equal to the Marschallin's aria in Rosenkavalier. Now, in Rosenkavalier, the Marschallin is this young woman, of course. She's in her 30s or 40s. She's maybe going to be 40. And Sarah, as we know, is an ancient lady. And Henry has put all of this information into this wonderful, wonderful aria. And Abraham listens to it, and he knows how painful it is for her, and says, it's okay, Sarah, for God's sake, don't, I love you. And they have a small little duet, and she still doesn't know what's the matter with her. There's a knock at the door, and it's the three angels, of course, as there were in all three other acts. There are three people at the hotel. This time it's the doctor and some nurses, and they come in, and they say to Abraham, and they say to Sarah, says, there's nothing wrong with you, hon. You're in the family way. It's the family way. And they do that wonderful, but Henry does a little kind of play on that marvelous scene in Act 2 Figaro, in which they find out that Bartolo was the father and Marcellina was the mother. And anyway, so they do this, and Sarah realizes that she's going to have a baby. And like the great announcement that happens to her in the Genesis story, Sarah and Abraham said, well, what do we do now? And the rest of the act is all about Sarah, and 9 months passes, and the baby is born, and at the very end of it, she has the little baby Isaac, and she looks up at Hagar, and Hagar is saying, what's going to happen to my child Ishmael now? What's going to happen? And there's this very amazing moment that was the result of one of our Hidden Valley workshops. You know, we did a workshop, and we always ask the audience, well, what do you think of this, blah, 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 blah. And this woman stood up and she said, you know, you Americans, it's terrific, but you know, I lived in Egypt. And I lived, and you have no idea of the gravity of this story. And what happens with Sarah and Hagar and Isaac and Ishmael and the whole generational hoo-ha. And we, of course, have written this slightly irreverent on purpose, but also serious little epic here. And we were talking dramaturg a few minutes ago, and so we both all sat back, Judy and Henry and I, and we said, what are we missing? And what we were missing was a little Luftpause, a little breath, where Sarah and Hagar have to look at one another, and I think Hagar says, will our children learn to play together? And of course, you don't know. You don't know. And that's where music theater leverages our emotions and our thoughts in a very important way.